Baby Park is one of the most infamous tracks in the Mario Kart series. To an outsider looking in, that may be a bit confusing. It doesn't have the massive scale of tracks like Mount Wario, it doesn't have the difficulty like the Rainbow Roads, but nonetheless, Baby Park was able to stand side by side with them as one of the best tracks in the franchise. The reason it was able to do that is because of its expertly crafted and complex layout. It's literally just a circle. Welcome to another episode of Level by Level. Today, I'm going to take a look at Baby Park so we can determine why I personally like the track so much, despite how, let's just say, basic the layout is. Now, you may have noticed that I actually haven't been mentioning Mario Kart 8 in particular. Well, that's because this is going to be a bit of a special Level by Level. Instead of just looking at the version of the track in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, we're also going to take a look at its original in Double Dash and its first remake in DS. There is surprisingly a lot that has changed about this track over the years, so much so that there's still some debate over which version is the best. There's no debate on which is the worst, everyone agrees on that one though. Now, it may seem absurd that they could even make any changes at all to a track this simple, but that's why I'm here to explain why each version of Baby Park, despite the simplicity, feel quite different from one another. So if you enjoyed this episode of Level by Level, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Let's jump right into our first version of Baby Park. While this episode is going to be fairly different from the other Mario Kart Level by Levels, I will still be running through our basic checklist. After all, it's important to see why the track is good in the first place before figuring out which version of the track does it best. So first let's look at the aesthetic of Baby Park and Double Dash. The main setting of this track is an amusement park, which is important in solidifying Baby Park's main theme, pure chaos. That is the essential element that makes Baby Park work so fantastically well. Every aspect of this track contributes to boosting that, and the background details are no exception. Looking off into the background, there are a ton of different attractions, a Ferris wheel, a giant Koopa, a giant ship.
What the dog doing?
And there's even a roller coaster going over the track. Pretty much everywhere you look, there is something new, and I personally think that is very important. While the gameplay, which we'll get to in a minute, can certainly create chaos by itself, the added chaos from the crowded background just enhances it a ton. I really can't think of any better setting than an amusement park for a track like this. It's pretty much the only place that can match its chaotic energy. That's just the background of the track though. The track itself is also pretty great aesthetically as well. It's divided into two sections, a pink and blue section. After each turn, the track color swaps, which may not seem like that big of a deal, but I personally think it was great for keeping this track visually appealing. Had it been either pink or blue the entire time, I could see it getting a bit boring to look at. Separating the two halves of the track is a very small wall with some grass. This lets you get a look at the other side racing by, which I just think is pretty neat. The bright green also helps keep this track colorful and lively. But of course, we can't talk about the chaotic energy of Baby Park without mentioning the music. This song is super fast paced and a bit repetitive, but it fits pretty dang perfectly here. The theme getting sped up on the last lap also helps a ton. Overall, they nailed the aesthetic here to make it as chaotic as possible without it being too distracting. Sure, they could have made it more chaotic by just throwing on a bunch of random things on the screen at a rapid pace, but it was important to also keep the background in the background to let players focus on the gameplay. And you know what? I say it's about time we look at that gameplay. This is where we'll be seeing the most differences between the three versions of this track, but let's set our baseline here with Double Dash. This is by far the shortest track in the game, with each lap lasting generally around 15 seconds. Now that might make this track seem absurdly short, however this is where we get introduced to Baby Park's primary gimmick. Double Dash was the first Mario Kart game to introduce tracks that had a different lap count than the others in the game. Up until this point, every track in the series had 3 laps, excluding the tracks in Super Mario Kart which had 5. This system worked fairly well, however I'm personally very happy that Double Dash allowed for there to be some variety in lap counts to make some special exceptions. Double Dash had 2 tracks with a different lap count from the others. One was Wario Coliseum with 2 laps since it was so massive, and the other is of course our topic for today, Baby Park, with a total of 7. This has the most laps out of any track in the Mario Kart series, which fits pretty well for the shortest track in the series as well. Now as for this track being chaotic, it does a very good job of that in this iteration. First off, due to the simple layout of a small circle, a lot of chaotic opportunities open up. The primary one is the fact that no matter how far ahead or behind you are, you will always be caught up in the pack. Sometimes front running a Mario Kart can be somewhat boring, as the only thing that can really stop you is a blue shell, and even then, it sometimes may not even be close to enough. On Baby Park though, you are never safe from the chaos, as there are always people right in front of you and right behind you. Since the lower positions generally get the better items as well, you may end up getting crunched by a chain chomp from someone in 7th place while you're sitting in 1st place. Speaking of those items, this is one major talking point as to why many believe Double Dash is the best version of this track. This game has a few special item mechanics that make it stand out from the other games in the franchise. First off are the double item boxes, which are meant to work with the game's double driver gimmick. From there it's just basic math. More items means more chaos. On top of that, Double Dash introduced character exclusive items. Unfortunately, this feature sucked and was never brought back. That's not to say the items themselves were bad though, quite the opposite actually. My personal favorites are the Bowser Shell and Giant Banana, which act as significantly larger versions of the Green Shell and Banana respectively. So not only are there more items being thrown around, but the items themselves are much bigger. The final item thing goes for all versions of this track, but I also think it's important to mention that since you will be running over the track 7 times instead of just 3, the items on the track will rapidly start piling up. By the end of the race, it will be filled with a ton of different items either on the ground or bouncing around, continuing to fuel the chaotic energy of this track to unmatched unmatched levels. One last note about this version's layout. The wall separating the sides is so small that items can actually be thrown over it, which I actually think is quite neat. But that pretty much concludes everything I have to say about the Double Dash version of this track. This did an absolutely phenomenal job being as chaotic as possible, with everything from the background to the music and to the gameplay perfectly creating this atmosphere. I personally love the chaos, as this is one of the most exciting tracks to race on. You can never really feel safe here, as you're always side by side with someone who's ready to kill you. This might just be one of the best executed themes in the series up until this point. Now I want you to take a long look at this version of the track and appreciate it, because just one game later, they managed to absolutely drain the life out of what made this track as good as it was. Mario Kart DS is often seen as one of the best entries in the series. While I don't personally think it's my all-time favorite, I definitely agree it's a fantastic entry. It has a really fun mission mode, it introduced drive-ons for the first time into the series, drive-ons for Smash, and its Nitro tracks are some of the best in the franchise. The same can't be said for these. Yeah, so Mario Kart DS was the first game to introduce the idea of retro tracks. Sure, Super Circuit let you play on all of the SNES Mario Kart tracks, but no one really counts those. With this being their first real time doing retro tracks though, they weren't really good at it. Honestly, it wasn't until Mario Kart 8 where the retro tracks got to be on the same level as the base game tracks. Now to be fair to DS, I can see why retro tracks would have been a bit challenging. They decided to take 4 tracks from each of the 4 previous games, meaning half of them were completely flat as they came from either Super Mario Kart or Super Circuit. As for the other 8, they were all from home console games, meaning they had to be downgraded in some ways in order to work on the DS. So yeah, I can see why it was difficult to do retro tracks for this game. That does not excuse this garbage. So the aesthetic, well, it's certainly a downgrade. Yes, it still takes place in an amusement park, but one quick glance between the two clearly shows that Double Dashes is so much more alive. The background in DS is completely stationary, making the place feel almost abandoned at times. Quite a bit was removed from the track as well. I mean, after the first turn, there's nothing but a bunch of trees to look at. I mean, this background looks like it could belong to any sort of basic circuit track, not one of the most chaotic places in the series. The roller coaster is completely gone here too, removing the main moving feature of the course. Overall, it's just so much more dull to look at. Yes, I do understand that this was likely done to improve performance on the DS, but it can't just be ignored as it was so important to what made this track feel as good as it did. It's almost night and day comparing the background of these two versions. It's one of the many tone killers on the DS Baby Park that prevent it from reaching the chaotic heights of the version that came before it. At least the music is still good, not quite on the level as the other two versions, but still definitely fitting for what the track is supposed to be. You know, I may have been able to forgive the aesthetic for being a bit weaker if the gameplay was still intact, but yeah, that's definitely not the case. First, let's start with the most obvious thing. For some reason, they decided to kill 2 laps on this track to only make it 5 instead of 7. Why? There's no way this was a technical thing, because it's literally just going over this same track 2 more times. Without those 2 final laps, not only is the course much shorter, but the finale is also a lot less chaotic since there are fewer items laying around from previous laps. Speaking of fewer items, Mario Kart DS went back to the standard 1 character per cart, meaning double item boxes were gone. Now yes, you can hold certain items behind you to essentially let you hold to, but overall there are still less items being thrown around here. The items in DS are also a lot more basic. There's no more crazy items like the Bowser shell or giant banana, it's just back to the same old basic shells and bananas. All of this combined makes DS considerably less chaotic than the Double Dash version, and thus a considerable downgrade of a track. Honestly, while I do love Baby Park, I think it was a pretty bad idea to bring it over into DS at all. I get why they did it, it's incredibly simple, but that makes it even more sad that they managed to mess it up. It's easily the worst version of this track. I feel outside of nostalgia, there's no reason to claim it's the best. But with that said, we do still have one more version of this track to look at, and it's a significant improvement, so let's get right into it. Our final version of Baby Park comes to us from Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. Now I do want to say that it was also in the original Mario Kart 8, where it is completely the same. However, the mechanics of Deluxe over the original 8 greatly improved this track, so I'm only going to be looking at it from the Deluxe perspective. So first let's look at the visuals, and yeah, this is way better. This was thankfully not part of the Booster Course Pass, meaning it got the full Mario Kart 8 graphics treatment. This looks so beautiful, with so many different bright colors on the screen, once again breathing life into this setting. We are still in an amusement park, but it's been a bit redesigned from the previous two. Many of the big set pieces have been updated, like the Koopa becoming a store and the ship becoming a swinging ship, fitting in much better with a theme park aesthetic. There are a ton more rides and buildings in general as well, which makes the setting even more alive than it was in Double Dash. There's even a few character statues to help the park look as good as it does, with the Bowser Jr. near the ship and a baby pink gold Peach acting as a grim reminder as to what Mario Kart rosters will be in 2025. Oh, and of course, the roller coaster is back, adding that essential bit of movement close to the track. Interestingly, while the road is still pink and blue, where the road changes has moved from being on the turn turns to the straightaways. Not really sure why this was done exactly, but I like it. The roads are also lined with a bright bit of yellow to help give this a little bit of extra color too. I think my favorite visual aesthetic change though has to be the walls. They've now been turned into lights, and once the last lap hits, they will begin to flash rainbow colors, making the last lap all the more intense. I love what they did for this track in the visual department. Easily the best looking of the three in my opinion. Oh, and the music is the best version of the song too. Not only does it sound the best on its own, but Mario Kart 8 also gave it the unique property of speeding up a little bit each lap instead of just on the last one, which matches the building chaos so incredibly well. I feel like we can all agree that aesthetic-wise, Mario Kart 8 is the clear winner for Baby Park. Of course, the debate between which Baby Park is the best isn't only about visuals, but rather the gameplay. Mario Kart 8 Deluxe is luckily no slouch in that department either. First off, we are back to 7 laps, thank goodness. Really got no clue what the DS devs were thinking there. Secondly, double items are also back here as well. While Mario Kart 8 Deluxe is still a one character per kart game, they decided to add double items anyway, and I think the game was much better for it. That means the high amount of items are back in full force, which as I said, is essential for this track. This is however where we run into our first, and honestly main thing keeping Mario Kart 8 Deluxe from being the best version of this track definitively, the lack of character exclusive items. This is actually a bit of a good and bad thing. Obviously the bad thing is the fact that there are no more giant items. However, Double Dash's character exclusive items did limit some others such as triple shells to only 4 characters. Now that exclusive items are gone, anyone can get triple shells, which means that there are a lot more items being thrown around. On top of that, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe has the massive advantage of having not 8, but 12 racers during a race. This means there are many more people to not only run into, but also pick up items. In my personal experience, this all shapes up to Mario Kart 8 Deluxe having an overall more chaotic atmosphere. I can certainly understand why people would miss the giant items, but I find the significantly larger amount of smaller ones to make up for that. Items aren't the only thing to consider here though, as there's still quite a bit more changes. Baby Park is actually one of the very few tracks that take place entirely in anti-gravity in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. I think that fits here perfectly as it makes driving here have both a unique feel and also be generally faster paced. Bumping into other racers while under the effect of anti-gravity will give you a boost, making this even faster than it was before. A few other subtle changes involve the additions of coins and the item box placements. Coins of course boost the speed of anyone who collects them, strengthening the chaos. The item boxes here also move along the track instead of just being stationary at the 2 turns. This makes it much more of a scramble to grab them, which I'm sure you can predict makes the races here a bit more crazy. The last layout change I want to mention is one that I could see being a bit more mixed, but I personally like it. The walls on the inside of the track have now been raised up, which now blocks items like green shells from crossing over it. This makes the track a bit more claustrophobic to me, which I think it should be as it's now harder to avoid items. Along with that, the edges of the walls have been lowered to reveal a patch of grass at the end. If you get a mushroom during the race, these can act as perfect little shortcuts to gain a bit of ground on your opponents. The lack of shortcuts on the original and DS did kind of take away from the chaos a bit, so their presence here goes a long way in making races here a lot more intense. You can't ever really tell how far ahead you are, so even on the last turn, you never know if someone's gonna cut through that grass and steal your victory. All of these subtle layout changes just add on more and more chaos, which is exactly how this track should be. However, there is one more thing that Mario Kart 8 Deluxe has that I think makes this version of Baby Park the clear winner. Yes, Double Dash's version is incredible, the giant items being constantly thrown around keep it chaotic just like it should be. But Mario Kart 8 Deluxe just has so many small yet important changes that make it the definitive version for me, and what I think is the biggest one is the introduction of 200cc. This new significantly faster speed class is what makes this version of the track for me. It makes it both so much harder and so much more fun to try and avoid the obstacles and other racers here. Even my dad, who generally dislikes 200cc, prefers having it on for this track. Oh, and also I just want to say he gave me the idea for this video, so shoutouts to him. The purple sparks from drifting, while definitely a smaller speed boost, also help this track have that fast-paced chaotic energy that it should. These significant boosts in speed to me are what make Mario Kart 8 Deluxe's version of Baby Park the by far definitive version of the track. In the end, the discussion about which Baby Park is the best seems to really come down to the game around the track rather than the track itself. Sure, Mario Kart 8 did change the layout a bit, but in the end, it mostly came down to that game's mechanics to make it the perfected version of the track. So hopefully that was able to answer why the discussion around which version of the track is best even exists at all. That's why I personally think it was a bad idea for this to be remade for Mario Kart DS, as its mechanics and console limitations just did not lend itself well for this track. The lack of big items, 12 racers, high speeds, and more make it the worst version despite the layout not really changing from Double Dash at all. I think now is a good time to throw these onto the Mario Kart level by level tier list. I'm gonna place DS in D tier. I was honestly tempted for F tier, but I don't think it's a terrible track. For Double Dash, I'm gonna place it at the very bottom of S tier. It's absolutely fantastic, and I can definitely understand why some people prefer it as the best. However, for me, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe's is just phenomenal, so I'm putting it very high in S tier. It's one of my personal favorite tracks, and I think it executed its chaos theme perfectly. So that's how, despite its simplicity, Baby Park got to stand alongside Rainbow Road and Mount Wario as one of the best tracks in the series. But anyways, that's it for this video. Do you all hate the version of Mario Kart 8 Deluxe since you can't throw Yoshi eggs like in Double Dash? Let me know in the comments. I know I didn't cover the Tour variant, but that's just because that game doesn't really play like the other Mario Kart, so it sort of felt weird to talk about. Plus, I don't really know much about Tour anyway. I do hope you all enjoyed this look at all versions of the track. Normally, I just do the most recent version and briefly look at the old one when there's a change. But since the topic of which baby park is the best is so debated, I thought it would be fair to give each version of this track its own full look. I might do this for some more tracks in the future too, who knows. But anyways, Strive Moans for Smash, and I'll see you guys next time.